Hello and welcome back to the second ever episode of Keeping It Spooky. I'm your host Luke here with my co-host Ink. This is about the third time of me trying this out, so it's routine for me. But today we'll be going over some things such as the awards. I think the awards are being announced in a week or two, so the MVP, Offensive Rookie of the Year, stuff like that. A lot of them are obvious, but there are some shockers that we may have. So we're going to give you our picks for those awards. Then we're also be covering some coaching hires. The last time we were on the pod, only Jared Mayo was hired by the New England Patriots. There's a lot more hiring since then, and there's a lot of fantasy implications that we'll be touching on in this episode. Although last time we talked about it, it wasn't official. We want to officially talk about it now that they're hired. And we're also going to be going over some rookies for the 2024 class, including Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunes, Brock Bowers, just to name a few. We're going to touch on those guys at first. And then once we get closer to the draft, we'll obviously talk about them more. And then the last point we'll be talking about at the end is sophomore wide receivers, not your Puka Nakuas, and obviously not Bijan and Jameer Gibbs because we glazed them way too much in the first episode. But we'll keep it light this episode. We won't talk about them as much. But yeah, we're going to be going over some sophomore wide receivers for the 2023 class.
Well done. There we go. Now I feel like we're off to a good start. Okay, so um yeah, first things first, let's talk some awards. It's at the forefront of everybody's minds in the NFL world right now. Aside from the playoffs, obviously. My Packers got eliminated last week, so I'm kind of out of tune with the playoffs and more looking forward to the awards. So, let's talk about those instead of how sad I am. Um We'll start off with the MVP. It's pretty much a consensus at this point that it is going to be the Baltimore Ravens quarterback, Lamar Jackson.
Not Snoop Huntley?
No, not Snoop Huntley.
Okay, all right, all right.
He's not making the Pro Bowl this year either. It's a big up. It's very upsetting.
Yeah, unfortunately not. But yes, I do agree. Lamar Jackson is my MVP. I think it's everyone's MVP at this rate. Brock Purdy may have had a chance over December for like 3 days, but Lamar Jackson, the Ravens beat them pretty bad in December, and after that, Lamar just kind of ran away with it. He's clearly a leader and a great quarterback in this offense. I mean, he obviously wasn't a great year for quarterbacks, struggling a lot of people, but I think Lamar Jackson is the top of the top, the creme de la creme. He's the top guy for quarterbacks, and obviously it's a QB award, so he's going to win MVP.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. Lamar Jackson, best player on the best team, best quarterback or the quarterback on the best team in the NFL this year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Way more dynamic than Brock Purdy. Beat Brock Purdy head to head. And in a weak year for quarterbacks, he absolutely deserves this award.
Most definitely. Now let's
So,
move. Oh wait, you want to go?
no, yeah, we're gonna move on to Offensive Player of the Year. That one was pretty easy, and I think this one's pretty easy at this point too. There might be some disagreements, but I can pretty confidently say that it's almost the consensus that Christian McCaffrey will be the Offensive Player of the Year this year. Tyreek Hill was on pace to probably run away with it. He was even like in MVP talks earlier this year, but as the season went on, his production started to not go away. He was still very good, but it started to ramp down a little bit. He wasn't as hot as he was in the earlier weeks, and Christian McCaffrey continued to play at his level, on only a level that we see from Christian McCaffrey, both in the receiving game and in the run game.
Yeah, most definitely. As much as it hurts me to say that it's not Tyreek Hill this year, he was my fantasy hero this year. But yeah, it is Christian McCaffrey without a doubt. I mean, he literally not only fantasy purposes, but he carried fantasy teams, and he also was outstanding for the 49ers with much work in the receiving and rushing game. Only Christian McCaffrey would really put up these numbers. Obviously, there's some guys like CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill that could maybe push an argument, but Christian McCaffrey was consistent throughout the whole year. There's not really an injury that Christian McCaffrey usually can potentially get. He never got injured really. So he definitely deserves this award. He's a key member to that 49ers offense and a real game changer.
Absolutely. I think that Christian McCaffrey is the difference between the 49ers team that made the Super Bowl a few years ago and the team that might make the Super Bowl right now. Uh, Quarterback wise, it's pretty similar. We saw Brock Purdy perform against the Packers last week. He was underwhelming to say the least. Um, Against a team that really has kind of struggled on defense for most of the year. That's why their defensive coordinator just got fired. Um, but Brock Purdy did not do all that great, but Christian McCaffrey was there when the team needed him most. And that's kind of how it's been all season. When Brock Purdy doesn't perform, Christian McCaffrey is there to pick up the slack. That's something that Jimmy Garoppolo did not have to lean back on a few years back. He had Raheem Mostert, who had a great game during the playoffs, but like Raheem Mostert, I think we can all agree is no Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, just about. He's up there though, certainly.
Fantasy wise, maybe
No, not don't
this
even.
this year.
No, don't even try. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the defensive player of the year. Now this one's kind of weird because I think my defensive player of the year is TJ Watt, but obviously he's always getting these like knick-knack injuries where he's out for a week or two, and it's in the best ability, some would say, is availability. But I think when TJ Watt does play, he's the best defensive player in the league without a doubt. I mean, we saw the Steelers in the playoffs without him; they just looked completely unorganized on defense. I think TJ Watt's really that game changer. If he played more games, he'd obviously be the consensus defensive player of the year. There could be other shouts from Myles Garrett and such, but Myles Garrett, I don't think was as good as TJ Watt when TJ Watt played.
I'm in agreement with you in a lot of the things that you said. I do have Myles Garrett as my defensive player of the year. He was dominant this year, kind of like how he's been for the past few years, really. But Myles Garrett was absolutely dominant this year. He was on the best defense in the NFL, or one of the top ones. It was like the Browns and the Ravens were like right here, right here. Um, and Myles Garrett was the engine behind that. He was just an animal off the edge. TJ Watt was fantastic as well, but I think the game's missing, um, and just the overall effect that he had on the team. While it's really immeasurable. I think that Myles Garrett, this is his year to win it.
Yeah, I don't hate it. It's really that's a very debatable one in these
Mhm.
awards. Some of them are very obvious, like the first two. I think this is kind of where it starts to get a little interesting. But the next one is the most controversial one, I believe, and that's Offensive Rookie of the Year. I really want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, looks like we're going to talk about Puka Nakua after all. Oh no. Um, but that's not who I have. I have CJ Stroud. In past years, offensive rookie of the year, if there's a good quarterback, the quarterback is probably going to win it. You look back a few years ago, you have Baker Mayfield and Saquon, you have Justin Herbert and Justin Jefferson, and the quarterbacks are the ones that win the awards. There's really no beating around the bush. When there's a good quarterback, they're going to win it. They're considered the more valuable player than a running back or a receiver or a tight end, which shout out to Sam Laporta for getting nominated for it this year, as a tight end. But it's really a two-man race between CJ Stroud and Puka Nakua. Puka Nakua broke all kinds of records. But when it comes to a quarterback coming into the league and pretty much unanimously being considered a top 10 quarterback straight out of the gate, especially after last year's weak rookie quarterback class, I think CJ Stroud wins the award here.
Um, I am in agreement. I think CJ Stroud is the Offensive Rookie of the Year. It was really hard for me to make a choice because obviously Puka Nakua broke the receiving yards and the receptions record for a rookie. But I just think CJ Stroud, when he played, the ability he had, he really showed it off against the Bucks and the Browns in the playoffs. Even just the ability this rookie quarterback has. I mean, it's on another level what we've seen. I mean, Justin Herbert was great in his rookie year, but I actually think CJ Stroud was a little bit better than that, and he looks really promising. And obviously, Puka Nakua probably deserved it any other year, but this year it's an exception. CJ Stroud, I think, definitely deserves it just because the impact he had.
I mean, we're talking about a guy when it comes to CJ Stroud. Earlier in the season, he was in MVP conversations as a rookie. And that's just a ridiculous achievement on its own. You rarely see a rookie quarterback enter MVP conversations, but CJ Stroud was that guy, moving the second worst team in the NFL last year and making them a playoff team that won a playoff game against one of the top defenses in the NFL. and CJ Stroud, I think, as well as Puka Nacua played this year. You know how we feel about Puka Nacua. We love Puka Nacua, but CJ Stroud's going to win this award.
Yep. Perfect. Perfectly said. Now moving on to the defensive rookie of the year. I know this is the fantasy podcast, but we can get a little jiggy with the defense. So I think Will Anderson is defensive rookie of the year. Although I feel like this wasn't really much of a contest. Devon Witherspoon was great in the first 2 weeks. He still played great throughout the season, but I just don't think at the same level as Will Anderson did. Will Anderson, we saw the progression throughout the season. He was progressing every week and turning into a better and better player. And obviously just got into the Pro Bowl, I think, because Max Crosby had a surgery or whatnot. But Will Anderson was great on the Texans. He was really a game. I mean, I keep saying game changer, but he was a game changer in the Texans. A very lackluster Texans defense. I mean, they don't really have a bunch of named guys, but Will Anderson was definitely a standout in that defense.
Yeah, I was a big fan of when the Texans made the move to trade up to 3 this past season. Uh, Getting their guy for their defense, getting their face of the franchise on offense, and getting the face of their defense with the third pick and Will Anderson. And he's definitely lived up to those expectations thus far as he continues to grow as a player. Um, and it's just been awesome to watch. But I do have Devon Witherspoon winning this award. I think Devon Witherspoon came in immediately and was the guy. I keep saying the guy. I'm gonna switch it up because I don't want to sound like a broken record. Devon Witherspoon came in as the cornerback one immediately. Tariq Woolen was fantastic last year, and Devon Witherspoon was even better this year. So when you look at Devon Witherspoon coming in as a rookie and like reasserting the Legion of Boom, or at least early stages of it.
Easy, easy, easy.
No, I really like what I see out of Devon Witherspoon. He's a physical corner. He stops people in the run game, and he's a lockdown corner. Um, Seahawks weren't too great this year, but I think he's earned it.
Yeah, it's strange with the Seahawks because Tariq Woolen had a great rookie year last year, obviously, but this year I don't think he was as good as he was last year. And then Devon Witherspoon kind of stepped up into that role. I do like Devon Witherspoon as a player. I just think Will Anderson was kind of more influential in terms of what he achieved because obviously the Texans made the playoffs and the Seahawks didn't. I think that's going to be an X factor in the decision, but ultimately it comes down to. Moving on, we're going to talk about the coach of the year. Now, coach of the year is such a fun one this year. There's a ton of candidates that could really deserve it, but I love Dan Campbell. So I'm going to say Dan Campbell is the coach of the year. He led the Lions to an NFC North title for the first time in a while. And also, I mean, I don't know if it counts playoff wise, but he also brought them to an NFC championship game. The Detroit Lions are in an NFC championship game. And it was mainly down to Dan Campbell and the system that he implemented. Such a well worked offense and for lacking on the defensive line, they have very well worked defense as well. Their secondary really stepped up in the latter half of the season. And yeah, I think Dan Campbell is the clear and cut and actually the most favorable option for coach of the year.
Yeah, Dan Campbell is absolutely the clear cut option. It fits the script perfectly that Dan Campbell would win the award this year. The Lions were on Hard Knocks last year. You watched their ascension as a young team during the season, eventually beating the Packers in Week 18 to make them miss the playoffs last year. And this year, they came out with a statement win straight out of the gates, beating the defending Super Bowl champions in Week 1, and they haven't looked back since. The Detroit Lions, for the first time in a long time, are in the NFC Conference Championship. I don't think that there's many living Lions fans that can say that they've seen the Lions in a conference championship. Uh, it's just amazing what he's done with this team, the culture that he's established. Um, and for that reason, I'd like to also mention D'Amico Ryans, who did a fantastic job in his first year with the Texans. Just like we said about those two rookies, um, they turned the team around, but they couldn't have done it without a good coach. And I think D'Amico Ryans really showed why he's earned his spot in the NFL as a head coach.
Yeah, he definitely deserves the honorable mention. But if we're going to say honorable mentions, I think Kevin Stefanski, although they went down pretty bad to the Houston Texans. I think Kevin Stefanski, the quarterback situation he had, he picked up Joe Flacco off his couch, put him into the system, and they were an amazing team to watch with so many injuries they had. The Browns although they went out kind of in a bad way, I was really impressed with the Cleveland Browns, at least in the regular season. And obviously, if Deshaun Watson for some reason becomes good again, which I don't want him to be good again, but
I don't think anyone does.
yeah, but if the Browns are good, it's because of Kevin Stefanski, and he's a hell of a coach, and he had a hell of a defense this year, and just he definitely deserves an honorable mention as well as D'Amico Ryan's.
Agreed. And you mentioned Joe Flacco, so I think that's the perfect transition into our next award, which is or the final award, which is the comeback player of the year. This is a controversial one.
Yeah, very controversial. I'm just gonna say my pick. I think it's I don't want to get into any controversy, so I'm just going to say my pick. I'm going to say Baker Mayfield is my comeback player of the year. He led this not Broncos, Buccaneers team to an NFC South, although NFC South is very lacking in terms of talent at the moment. He led them to an NFC South title and also beat the Eagles. He played incredible against the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles were a beaten up team. They were limping at the end of the season, but Baker Mayfield took advantage of that. He played great in his first season with the Buccaneers, and people wrote Baker off. Obviously, he had that great drive against the Raiders with the Rams last year, but no one really expected Baker Mayfield to play the way he did this year. And honestly, I think if Joe Flacco started out the season a little earlier, I think he would have gotten it. But I think he got picked up by the Browns a little too late. I think it's too late. And then Damar Hamlin, people will say that. Obviously, it's tragic what happened and fair play for coming back. I can admire that. Everyone can admire that. But I think comeback play of the year strictly comes down to play after being hit down hard. And I think Baker Mayfield was at the lowest of the lows and he came back and he proved that he's still starting quarterback in this league.
Damar Hamlin didn't really play.
Yeah, but he came back. I'll give him, you have to give him credit for at least attempting to be on an NFL
Yeah,
roster.
yeah, yeah. He didn't play much. Uh,
No.
but neither really did. You perfectly hit the nail on the head. Again, in my opinion, Joe Flacco didn't play that much either. There were a few weeks left in the season when he came onto the Browns team, and he performed fantastically for a guy that just got picked up off his couch. Really brought a spark to that Browns offense that no one really saw coming. After seeing 2 weeks of PJ Walker, Joe Flacco came in and was a breath of fresh air in his old age, which was really fantastic to see. But I do agree that Baker Mayfield should win comeback player of the year based on the nominees.
Yes, definitely.
There's one guy that was not nominated
Breeze,
who,
Breeze, Breeze, Breeze.
yes, I'm very upset about it. Brees Hall. It's all over social media right now as well. Brees Hall definitely deserved to be nominated for that award and probably should have won it. There are a few guys that got more usage than him this year. There were a few guys that were more important to their offense, more important to their team than Brees Hall this year. And it's coming off of a bad ACL tear in his first year. He bounced back and was just as explosive and as great of a running back as we've seen him.
Yeah, I was gonna mention Brees Hall, but I just think if he was nominated, I don't think he would still get it. Honestly, I just think there's too many storylines that kind of although Brees' story was great, I don't think it'd have the clicks as I mean, Joe Flacco doesn't deserve it, but I think Joe Flacco comeback player of the year would be more appealing to the NFL than a Brees Hall comeback of the year. It's just how it works, unfortunately. But
Mhm.
yeah, those are our awards. We had a few disagreements, but mainly we had some consensus picks for a lot of these awards. And now we're going to move on to the head coaching hire. So there's been a lot since we last recorded, and it's only been like what, a week. So
Yeah,
so
only been a week.
I guess we'll start off with the Falcons last night just officially appointed the Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris to be their head coach, who apparently was an interim head coach of the Falcons a few years ago. I don't remember that at all, but yeah, he finally got the head coaching role of the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and I think that this is. I mean, no one really saw this coming. Raheem Morris was linked with a few teams. The Atlanta Falcons were not really one of them. People thought that Bill Belichick was going to go to Atlanta. I had it as a lock, and I think a lot of people really did. But Raheem Morris is now there, and I really think it's a great fit. Raheem Morris is still a young coach. He's a great defensive mind. He's faced some of the toughest offenses in the NFL the past few years. I saw a stat earlier today. In 2020, he faced the 10th, uh, 10th best offenses, like the 10th toughest schedule in terms of offenses. Then the year after that, it was third. And then the year after that, it was third again. So Raheem Morris has seen his fair share of really great offenses, and he's continued to have really solid defenses with the Rams. So I think that he absolutely deserves the job, and I can't wait to see what he does in Atlanta.
Yeah, I agree a lot, and it's very impressive that he had an offensive resume and then he switched over to defense and still ran a great defense with the LA Rams. And I think that I heard a report that the Seattle Seahawks were also very close to appointing him as well. So I think it was a battle. He impressed a lot of teams in interviews. He clearly was a great candidate. I think this will have some good fantasy implications. I think we can. I know I said we weren't going to touch on Bijan, but we kind of have to touch on Bijan a little bit with this appointment. Bijan Robinson should be freed. He should be freed from fantasy jail. He will probably go in the first round as we projected last week, but I think it's probably more solidified now that he's got a proper guy. And I think Raheem Morris will back him and believe in the first round. He was drafted in the first round for a reason, eighth overall pick. Bijan Robinson is a very talented running back, and Raheem Morris will see that and put a lot of faith into him.
Yeah, I'd even argue that Raheem Morris getting hired as the Falcons head coach is better than Bill Belichick being hired as the head coach, at least for Bijan Robinson and his fantasy aspects. Bill Belichick has been known, we touched on this last episode, to use a rotation of running backs while he was in New England. But there's really no concern about that when Raheem Morris is coming in. And Tyler Algier is still a good player, but he's no Bijan Robinson. We'll finally see what he's capable of this next year.
Yeah, definitely. Drake London as well. I expect the Drake London. I expect a better year out of Drake London. There's not many. I guess Kyle Pitts. I don't really know what to say of Kyle Pitts. I'm not going to touch on Kyle Pitts now. I think we'll do that in a more in depth of every team when we get there eventually. But Kyle
Mhm.
Pitts and Drake London should have more fantasy value than they did this year. So let's hope on that. And then the next hire I want to cover is Carolina Panthers. I actually really like this hire. Dave Canales worked with Geno Smith in Seattle, developed into a great quarterback. I think he was top 10 that year in 2022. Geno Smith played great. Dave Canales really put faith in him and progressed him. And he didn't start for like 8 years or something like that. And Dave Canales progressed him into playing like that. I mean, obviously, Geno, you saw how Geno a little bit fell off after Dave Canales left. And then Dave Canales went over to Tampa Bay to be their offensive coordinator. And we saw Baker Mayfield absolutely fly in a Tampa Bay system with Dave Canales. And I think this is great for Bryce Young's sake, a guy that really will put in faith into him. Obviously, Bryce Young has had a very tough NFL start. His confidence is probably very low. I think Dave Canales, he's worked with guys that are confidence are very low. And I really like this hire. I think that was the reason he was hired to sort of bring Bryce Young to the level that he can achieve. Obviously, there's not many pieces around him. They're going to need to get a T. Higgins or something like that in free agency to really help Bryce Young out. But I love this hire by Carolina.
Yeah, Dave Canales is not a guy that we talked about when we were predicting our coaches last episode, but I absolutely love this hire as well. I think this is probably one of the best moves the Carolina Panthers have made in years, bringing in Canales to be their head coach. Uh, exactly what you said. Bryce Young needs a confidence boost, and when you have a quarterback whisperer supposedly entering your team as the new head coach, it's a fresh new face for a really abysmal team from last year. It's a new face that'll encourage and help Bryce Young flourish, hopefully. And if they do bring in those other offensive pieces to help Bryce Young out, then maybe we can see a turnaround in his second year. That would be great to see.
Most definitely. I'm a Bryce Young believer. I mean, obviously he had a really bad go rookie year, but I don't think that was totally on him. Obviously, he could have been a bit better in certain scenarios. But my main concern, although I love this hire a lot, is Dave Canales might be a little inexperienced compared to other head coaches. But the NFC South just seems to be doing a complete revamp of, I mean, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Bucks are going to need a new offensive coordinator, and the Saints are kind of in a weird place. So I like this hire. I think it's a progressive hire. Brian Burns is potentially leaving in free agency, which might be a big blow to this Carolina team. But if Dave Canales gets a good defensive coordinator, I don't see why this team can't be a lot better next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's really only one way to go up from where they were last year, and that's up. Uh, they might not be good year one with Canales, but as long as we see a step up from Bryce Young, I think that they can bring in the other pieces around him to potentially make things a lot better in the next few years. And Panthers fans will finally have something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. I misworded that. I don't think the Panthers are that good this year, but I think they'll show signs of progression, so signs of some kind of life in that Panthers team. Now moving on to Tennessee, a guy we didn't really talk about at all. We didn't really see him getting hired anywhere. Is Brian Callahan, the offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals, moved from Cincinnati. He's now the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. This kind of came out of nowhere. Obviously, he was interviewed in a lot of places. We really didn't see that Bengals offense become its full potential this year with so many injuries. Jamar Chase got banged up. Joe Burrow obviously had that wrist injury. T. Higgins wasn't to his standard of what we expect out of T. Higgins. But Brian Callahan had a lot of coaching opportunities the prior year, and he didn't get hired. But we saw Brian Callahan worked well with Jake Browning because Jake Browning played relatively well when he came in. Obviously, not to the level of Joe Burrow, but the Bengals' offense was still relatively good with under the circumstances they were in. I like this hire. I think it's going to help Will Levis, although he also is a bit inexperienced. But this is a young Titans team, and they're completely rebuilding, so they're probably going to be a little rough next year. But I like this hire in terms of developing Will Levis.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to be seen when it comes to Brian Callahan. Again, not similar to Canales, not much experience in a head coaching position. I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but the day of the hire, I was actually thinking earlier that day. No one's going to believe me, and that's okay.
I
But
don't
I was
believe you.
actually thinking about why he wasn't being really talked about as a head coaching candidate, considering how well he did with Browning at quarterback this year. But then he got hired by the Titans, and I think it makes sense, but I wouldn't really be surprised if it doesn't work out, if I'm being completely honest. Uh, he's done a good job, but he's also had a lot of weapons at his disposal with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd being one of the best receiver trios in the NFL. Joe Burrow, I mean, he developed into a great quarterback, but he was already kind of that when he came into the league, if I'm being honest. He just got hurt his rookie year. And then Joe Mixon obviously has been one of the best running backs of the past few years. So when I look at a guy like Brian Callahan, I'm not going to write him off because he deserves a shot just like everybody else. But I'm also not going to jump at this hire like it's the best thing the Titans could have done. I think there were better choices.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I like the points you made there, but I think for a young quarterback to develop, it's good to get an offensive-minded guy in, like Brian Callahan. And obviously, comparing him to Joe Burrow is a major, major, major stretch. But if he could develop Will Levis and progress his game a lot better, obviously he will never become Joe Burrow's level, but yeah, I think Will Levis needs a young quarterback coach that kind of believes in him. So I think it's a solid hire, maybe not the best, maybe not the worst, but we don't really know. We have to see how this team performs. Moving on, we both called this. Antonio Pierce was officially appointed the Raiders head coach. He was the interim for the last few weeks of the season after Josh McDaniels got fired. But he really impressed the Raiders organization. The Raiders, they don't really have a QB. I don't believe in Aiden O'Connell at all, but I think this was the right hire in terms of the players all wanted it. Max Crosby, Devontae Adams were very public about that they wanted Antonio Pierce to be their head coach. I think this was great because now the players will be happy. They don't Devontae Adams probably won't be traded anymore, but they do need a change at QB.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what this ensures is that you're keeping your stars happy, which is perfect for a team that hasn't really had that much success. Even though they have talent on their roster, they haven't had the success. So keeping those key players is very important if they want to continue to even attempt contending. I wouldn't write off a Devonte Adams trade yet because he was not really producing last year, and a few years ago, we thought he was locked up on a team, and then he got traded like pretty much right after that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Devontae Adams still moves this offseason, but they are in a better position to keep him than they were before, for sure. And Antonio Pierce deserved the job; he earned it. those last few games where he was the head coach. He really showed what you smiling about over there.
I thought you were gonna say Chargers about the beatdown or the beatdown of the Chargers, and
Oh no,
I
I wasn't going to talk about that.
uh,
Chargers fans have gone through enough. I don't need to bring that up.
wow, that makes a great
Yeah.
shift for Jim Harbaugh. Yes, I am so happy. If you've seen, I don't probably none of you follow the Twitter, but I was glazing Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers all week, and it finally happened. I really like this for the Chargers. We talked about this in the previous episode, but he's really a cultural builder, and the Chargers need that desperately. Harbaugh is dislikable to many, but as a coach, he seems to be very influential, and his players love him as a coach. JJ McCarthy is very public about it, as well as some other Michigan players. But I really think this hire is great. The Chargers are in cap hell this offseason, so they're going to need a complete revamp. Joey Bosa's probably gone. Khalil Mack's probably gone. A lot of pieces are probably gone. But if one guy can turn this around, help Justin Herbert get some weapons, help develop the offense, but mainly the defense as well. The run game lacked a lot last year. I think Jim Harbaugh is the guy. This was the correct hire by the Chargers. They needed a gutsy guy with a set of balls. I'm gonna say it, a set of balls, and that's what Jim Harbaugh has.
Yeah, we both touched on this last episode. We both predicted him to the Chargers, and it was for good reason. He's exactly what they need in terms of run offense and their defense. Brandon Staley was supposed to be a defensive-minded head coach, and the defense was good on paper, but it was terrible in reality. Uh, Jim Harbaugh is a guy that when he's not on your team, you hate him, and when he is the coach of your team, you might still hate him if you're a fan, but if you're a player, you're gonna love him. He's a great team builder. He's a great locker room coach. He's a player's coach, but he's also like he has a hard nose and he's ready to turn things around in LA. And I'm super excited for Chargers fans.
Most definitely, they deserve a guy like that, a guy who really cares about the team, not Brandon Staley, who might go to the Packers, but we won't touch on that. Anyway, let's go over some rookies for the 2024 class because wow, this is an exciting year for offense in terms of rookies in the 2024 class. You have guys like Marvin Harrison, which more and more likely as a Cardinals fans, I'm getting my hope a lot up that we might get Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. is team proof though. Whatever team he's going to be on, he's going to produce. He's a generational wide receiver talent. He's up there with your Jamar Chases in terms of production in college, but I think Marvin Harrison can reach heights that many can't. Marvin Harrison Jr., I would love as a Cardinals fan. I would absolutely adore it. It's more looking more and more likely that the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams, and hopefully he falls to 4. I'm praying, but I love Marvin Harrison Jr., and I'm really excited to see him in this league.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr., uh, there's still a lot of speculation about what's going to happen at the top of that draft. Will the Bears keep Justin Fields? Will they not? They probably shouldn't, but they still might. DJ Moore has talked about how much he wants Justin Fields to stay as their quarterback. He's vouched for Justin Fields, but when you have a guy like Caleb Williams at 1, it's kind of hard to pass up. So if Marvin Harrison does go to the Cardinals, which is probably one of the most realistic options right now, he'd be the clear cut wide receiver 1 on that team, like pretty much straight out of the gates. And in terms of fantasy, he'd probably be one of the highest drafted rookie wide receivers ever.
Yeah, most definitely. As you said, the Chargers wide receiver room is not very good. We've got some young guys, but nothing
Cardinals.
crazy. Yeah, the Cardinals.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, did I say it wrong?
You said Chargers.
Oh, sorry. I have a lot of Chargers things in my head.
You're good, buddy.
But yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. will be drafted very high. I have him right now as a luxury wide receiver 2. If Marvin Harrison Jr. is your wide receiver 2 in fantasy next season, that is scary. But I think he's a very safe floor in terms of what he can achieve. Probably the safest rookie wide receiver we've ever seen come into the league. He's very team proof, as I said. He'd be a great wide receiver 2, but also he could be a low end wide receiver 1, depending on the strategy you head into your drafts with. If you want to go for running backs first 2 rounds and then get Harrison in your third round. He might not even be there at that point. We don't really know where he's going to be. It depends on what team he ends on. But I predict him to be at that 2 to 3 turn. Kind of has a lot of upside, and I think he'll have a. I don't want to say he's going to have a Jamar Chase rookie type season because I think he can achieve more even, but I think he's going to produce a lot and he's going to be great with whatever quarterback he has, whether that's Kyler Murray, I don't want to say Justin Fields, but he will be great under he'll be great under Justin Fields if he somehow ends up on the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few teams here. Um, just to name them off, we have the Bears, we have the Cardinals, we have the Chargers, we have the Giants, and the Patriots. We'll start at the top. The Bears. Uh, the only situation where he goes to the Bears is if they keep Justin Fields and make a trade with the Commanders, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Commanders really have a chokehold on the Bears and what they're able to do. If the Bears choose to stick with Justin Fields, then I doubt that they would want to move down more than one spot, because then they'd miss out on Marvin Harrison Jr. But you can't really stay at one either because there's so much value there to be earned, for teams trading up for Caleb Williams. So Bears would have to keep Fields. They'd have to trade with Washington, and then they'd get Marvin Harrison Jr. Him and DJ Moore would be a dynamic duo, but that would probably be the lower end of where his fantasy implications would go.
Yeah, definitely. The Bears are interesting because we don't really know what. There's a lot of question marks around there right now. Obviously, they have a new offensive coordinator as well. Going to be interesting to see. The Chargers, I don't see him falling where the Chargers are picking, so I'm not going to rule them out because you never know. But I don't see him going there. The Giants definitely not falling there. The Giants will probably take another guy we're going to touch on later, and then the Patriots could take Marvin Harrison Jr., but I think with the new head coaching hire, they're going to want a new QB. As you said in the previous episode, a new coach likes to pair with a new QB as well. And the Patriots need something, man. They need like some kind of spark on offense. And Marvin Harrison Jr. could be that, but I think they're going to prioritize QB in this draft.
Yeah, agreed. They could. The Patriots are weird. They might always be weird. They could still stick another year with someone else. Um, and since they need that spark, Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of the best options that they can get for a spark, really. He'd immediately be the wide receiver one in that offense. But there's so many questions at quarterback that really they probably should prioritize QB. We see what the class for next year is looking like in terms of quarterbacks, and if teams are going to want to take a QB, it should probably be this year.
Agreed. Very agreed. But yeah, I think his value is not going to change through fantasy, whatever team he's on. Obviously, there's better situations than none. I think the best situation here is probably the Cardinals, I want to say. The Chargers could be exciting too, but I don't see him following there. And then the worst situation, if the Patriots get him without a QB, I don't like that really a lot just because I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what there's so many question marks around that. But moving on to Brock Bowers, who has a lot of hype as a tight end, probably more hype than Kyle Pitts did coming into the draft in terms of overall player. Obviously, Kyle Pitts went fourth. I don't see Brock Bowers going that high, but there's a lot of potential suitors for Brock Bowers, including the Chargers, I think are a good shout. The Titans are a great shout. The Jets and even the Giants potentially. I see the Giants maybe taking him as well, but I think Giants are going to prioritize receiver. But what do you think about Brock Bowers?
I mean, Brock Bowers is like you said, one of the best tight end prospects that we've seen in the past few years. Um, he's comparable to Kyle Pitts in terms of hype, but as a player, the interesting thing about Brock Bowers is that he's still very athletic, but he's not close to the athlete that Kyle Pitts is. But he's still so freaking good where he's being projected as a top 10 pick, and that is terrifying, when you look at a rookie tight end coming into the NFL. In terms of fantasy, he's going to be probably the highest drafted rookie tight end uh, ever, maybe behind Kyle Pitts. Uh, and he's almost team proof. Out of these options, the only one that I don't really like for him is the Giants, and he'd still probably be like a low end tight end one option if he went there.
Yeah, I agree. I think The most realistic option for him right now is the Titans. I see the Chargers potentially trading down or prioritizing another receiver on top of more than Bowers. So I think the Titans, where they pick at 6 or 7, I want to say. No, they pick at 7.
Mhm.
The Titans would be a great spot for him. I think he would pair well with Will Levis and Brian Callahan. Obviously hired. He Will Levis needs pieces. I think Brock Bowers is a good fit. Maybe they would go for a receiver as well, or but we don't really know. But I think the Titans is most realistic. And then, as you said, yeah, probably the Giants are the least realistic here. The Giants don't really need a tight end after acquiring Darren Waller, but they do need some offensive pieces. So we never really know. But he could slip, Brock Bowers. He really could slip. We don't really know what's going to happen. QB's values could shoot up. There could be some QBs. People like the Raiders and the Falcons could be looking for QBs in this kind of range. So there could be a lot of movement around that area where Brock Bowers is projected to go. But I think my favorite spot for him right now is the Titans.
Yeah, when you're making NFL draft projections, it's always a crapshoot. You never really know what teams are thinking. You never know how things are going to change, especially this early on. The 2023 to 24 season isn't even over yet, and we're here talking about Brock Bowers and his potential suitors and how he'll be affected in fantasy next year. Um, my favorite team for him right now is the Jets. And I think that him on the Jets would be very similar to Sam Laporta this year, but he's even better than Sam Laporta, I want to say. Um, he'd be a great weapon amongst others. You have kind of a high risk, high reward situation when it comes to Brock Bowers on the Jets. Whether Aaron Rodgers will step back into what he was before. You have Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall there, similar to how you have Jameer Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown in Detroit. And I just think that Brock Bowers would be a really solid tight end one option if he does go to the Jets.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of fantasy value, he's a tight end one. He'll be drafted. I know Kincaid was kind of drafted as a borderline tight end one this year. I think Brock Bowers, wherever he goes, is going to be a tight end one. Not a luxury tight end one by any means. There's still going to be your Laportas, your Kelseys, your Andrews, Trey McBride. I think will go ahead of him, but I think he'll be in that like tight end 6 to 8 range. I want to say, or maybe a low end of tight end one. But he definitely has potential wherever he goes, and if you know Brock Bowers is on your board, I like him compared to a lot of other tight ends in this league.
Yeah, we really saw the revamping of the tight end position this year, and hopefully that's a trend that continues with Brock Bowers.
Yeah, definitely. Now moving on to Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors has had a lot of hype in the past few weeks, and deserved hype. Let's not forget that. Probably not as deserved as Marvin Harrison Jr., but still up there. Malik Neighbors is also a great wide receiver talent. The creme de la creme, besides Marvin, of course. My favorite option for him is going to be the New York Giants. The New York Giants are crying out for a wide receiver one. And if they get Malik Neighbors, I don't know who's going to be QB next year. Probably Daniel Jones, just because of that fat contract he has. But they need a weapon besides Saquon Barkley, who we're unsure who's even going to resign with the Giants. We'll touch on that in another episode. But I think Malik Neighbors is the best suited for the Giants. Another option could be the Cardinals if Marvin Harrison is picked before them. They're going to need a wide receiver no matter what. I think Malik Neighbors is perfect right there. Also, the Falcons, but I honestly, right now, I don't see the Falcons, him slipping to the Falcons at all because they're going to need a QB after the new Raheem Morris hire. And the Bears could maybe, a lot of these, I don't see Malik Neighbors falling to. I see him going in the top 5, 6. And I don't see him falling anywhere outside that just because there's not some crazy like defensive prospect or anything like that. Teams are going to cry out for a wide receiver one, and Malik Neighbors would be that.
Yeah, if we're just talking about offensive fits, though, I mean, if Marvin Harrison doesn't go to Arizona, it's a similar situation for Malik Neighbors, where he'd step in and immediately be the wide receiver one. It would be a lot closer between him and Marquise Brown, splitting targets probably. He wouldn't be like the de facto guy, but Malik Neighbors would automatically be the wide receiver one in that offense, I believe. When it comes to the Giants, like you said, they're screaming for some receiver talent. Neighbors again would be the automatic wide receiver one there, and the Titans. They just hired a new coach. They need weapons more than anybody. Um, and if they don't get Brock Bowers, then why not? Why not draft Malik Neighbors? Their receiver room right now consists of Traylon Burks and like Nick Westbrook Akine.
Shout out.
Uh, and then D Hop is off in free agency. Doubt he comes back. So they need a receiver bad.
Yeah, you mentioned Marquise Brown. I don't think we're gonna keep him. I think Marquise Brown is
Mm.
done as a Cardinal. I wouldn't rely on Marquise Brown splitting uh, targets with Malik Neighbors. But the Cardinals are gonna pick receiver. I think no matter what, it's gonna be who. But I wouldn't mind Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. I see Malik Neighbors as a wide receiver three on your team. I don't know if that's luxury or high end. But if you can get Malik Neighbors in your fifth round, sixth round, kind of where Jamar Chase was drafted in his rookie year, I don't mind that at all. I really like that value for him. We've seen in the past few years, rookie wide receivers have had tons of value more than any other years, really. Puka Nakua, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, just to name a few. If Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison, I know we touched on Marvin Harrison earlier, but if they can reach those heights, I mean, I don't see why they can't go in earlier than the fifth round or so. Especially Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, I think, will be a fifth to sixth round pick.
Yeah, and the thing is that those are the projections for these guys. Marvin Harrison is considered a generational wide receiver prospect. Um, if this weren't a pretty good quarterback class, then he'd be in serious like there would be situations where he'd be considered like the number one overall player in the class. Um, and then Malik Neighbors was arguably an even better receiver this past season than Marvin Harrison Jr. just in terms of statistical value and how great he was. Um, Malik Neighbors, you know how people love their LSU wide receivers. Um, he deservedly would go around that fifth or sixth round, and I wouldn't bat an eye.
Yeah, it's strange because when you really look at the stats, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors don't really separate that much in terms of statistical value. But I do think Marvin Harrison will just be drafted a lot higher just because of, I think, name value has a big play on it. And he obviously has a lot of hype for whatever team he goes on. Same as Malik, but just not as much. But it's going to be interesting. But there's also another wide receiver that's supposed to go in the top 10, which is Rome Odunze. He could really go anywhere. I think he'll eventually go in the top 10 just because teams they're gonna need receivers. There's gonna be a lot of receiver changes in terms of who goes where. My favorite destination for him, I don't think we have it written down, but oh wait, we do. I love the Bears taking Roma Dunze. If they take Caleb Williams, I think he would be a great pairing with DJ Moore. Definitely what the Bears are going to look for, but they also could look for some defensive guys like Dallas Turner or whatnot. You don't really know, but I like Roma Dunze to the Bears.
Yeah, Roma Dunze, he was. You have Marvin Harrison, and then you have Malik Neighbors, and then you kind of have everybody else. But Roma Dunze is definitely at the top of that list, in my opinion. You have guys like Keon Coleman too, Xavier Worthy, AD Mitchell, those dudes. But Roma Dunze is the cream of the crop when it comes to that next tier. And we've talked about a lot of teams so far and how Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison probably wouldn't fall to them. This is the guy that they should be looking at. Roma Dunze had a fantastic year at Washington with Michael Penix throwing him the ball. And he can really just fit into any offense straight out of the gates and be a really productive wide receiver. He's not really close to the other guys in terms of projections for this next year, at least from what I'm understanding. But again, it depends on fit. He could be teams we have down here, aside from the Bears, we have the Jets, we have the Cardinals, the Saints, the Raiders, and the Bengals. All teams that are picking a little bit later, a little bit outside of that top 10 for the most part. And that's probably where he's going, like around that Chris Olave range.
Yeah. It's strange with Roma Dunze because I don't really know what team he's going to be on. I feel like with Malik and Marvin Harrison Jr., there's more of a team swaying that direction. I don't really know with Roma Dunze. Right now, I have him valued around the eighth round. I think that's pretty fair. It's kind of a gamble in terms of I don't think he will. I don't know if he's going to be a wide receiver one directly where he goes. I doubt he will,
Mm.
but I think he'll have. I don't want to say Jordan Addison type year because Jordan Addison had a great but also a strange rookie year. I like where Jordan Addison was picked last year in terms of where Roma Dunze is going to be picked. I think it'll be in that same maybe eighth round, ninth round. I really like that for him. If you can get him as a wide receiver four, he could have tons of upside, turn into a
Hmm.
great flex play for the rest of the year. Because rookies, as we see after the bye week, rookies love to progress in terms of targets and whatnot. They really try to get the rookies involved later in the season. And I love Roma Dunze. Not as high as the other two, but I definitely like him as a eighth to ninth rounder.
Yeah, we talked about the Jets. He'd be a good wide receiver too there, assuming they don't trade for anybody. Just another. We've talked about surrounding Aaron Rodgers with weapons in his later years. That would make perfect sense, at least in my brain. The Cardinals, the only situation where he goes to the Cardinals is if they trade down, which is a possibility because Cardinals need pieces all around their team. They need DBs, they need new receivers. So Odunze would be a very good piece for them to build off of. The Saints have them here because I mean, outside of Chris Olave, you don't really have very many dynamic playmakers. You have a deep threat in Rashid Shaheed, and then you have an aging slant boy. So it's not looking too good for them in terms of playmakers. Odunze would bring a spark, another young player to come in there. Uh, the Raiders, if they're going to continue to try and contend, then they probably need a better option than Hunter Renfro, and Devontae Adams might be out the door. So if Devontae Adams is out the door, then he's the guy that steps up and they begin their rebuild with him.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Raiders. I think they're going to prioritize QB, or at least they should. It's inevitable that I see Russell Wilson in a Raiders jersey next year. I could almost see it.
Ew.
I could see it already. I just picture it and I see it. But yeah, that was a great sector in terms of rookies. Obviously, there's a ton more guys like Adonai Mitchell, Keon Coleman, Xavier Worthy, just to name a few. But those are going to be later first round guys or mid to later first round picks. They could end up on literally any team, so we're not going to project where they're going to fall. But those guys are going to have some value, not nowhere close to what the guys we just said. Probably 10th rounders or later, just a gamble guy, but who doesn't love taking a little gamble on a rookie wide receiver?
Yeah,
It's definitely worth it.
absolutely. And also that there are a few running backs in this class that are definitely going to be fantasy relevant, but again, we can't really predict anything when it comes to running backs. Any team can take a running back. We've seen that in the past few years. Even when you least expect it, they'll take one. See Zach Charbonnet last year going to the Seahawks in the second
Yeah,
round.
what a
Like things
joke.
like that. Things like that. So you just can't really predict where running backs are going to go. But guys like Blake Corum, Will Shipley, Braylon Allen, all those, and a few other guys as well. They'll definitely have their place in the league, and we'll be able to talk about them more once they get drafted.
Yeah, it's obviously very early. We can't really take a gamble on where they're going to go too much. But there's no Bijan, there's no Jameer Gibbs in this year's draft class, so we can't really predict that much.
Mhm.
Now moving on to a different sector, softball wide receivers. What a great year for rookie wide receivers. As I previously mentioned, wow. I mean, the guys we saw progress throughout the season was crazy. Just to name a few, we're going to talk on all. Jaden Reed, Rasheed Rice, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell when he was healthy, JSN, and Jordan Addison, and Puka Nakua. We're not going to talk about Puka Nakua, but wow. I mean, what a class in terms of wide receivers this year.
Yeah, this is really the best wide receiver class that we've seen since I want to say 2020. You had aside from the first one, which was Henry Ruggs, things went pretty well. You got like Jerry Judy, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. We're not going to talk about Jalen Rieger, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, just to name a few. And there were many other good receivers that came from that class. This is starting to look like it could be something like that. A lot of these guys had really either productive rookie years or very promising rookie years.
Yeah,
So I'd
definitely.
love to get into that.
But you also did miss out on the 2021 draft class, which had Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, recently we've seen tons of great rookie receiver classes.
Mhm.
But this year we saw maybe not those top guys besides Puka, but a lot of reliable, solid guys. A guy I want to touch on is Rasheed Rice because I had Rasheed Rice in fantasy, and he was very reliable for me in the latter part of the season. Racked up a ton of targets and receptions. Maybe not. Actually had a lot of touchdowns. I'm not going to say that, but he was definitely the best Chiefs wide receiver this year, without a doubt. No one really came close. And I can only see the progression go up. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce have all publicly said they have a lot of faith in Rasheed Rice. And we saw against the Miami Dolphins how much he was used and how promising he was. I don't expect him to dip off next year at all. Maybe the Chiefs draft another guy, but I have Rasheed Rice going in the fifth to fourth round. I think he will be a very great wide receiver three if you can get hold of him, because he's a wide receiver one on potentially the or probably the best offense in the league. I mean, unless Andy Reid leaves, but Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. He needs to throw somewhere, and Rasheed Rice and Travis Kelce are going to be great options for him. I love Rasheed Rice.
Yeah, Rasheed Rice was a very pleasant surprise for me this season. Uh, I remember in my mock drafts last year, I had Rasheed Rice going to the Buffalo Bills as a wide receiver two kind of guy. Um, and then he was the de facto wide receiver one for the Chiefs this year. The team struggled in a lot of aspects compared to past years, but Rasheed Rice was the one constant in the receiver room, the one that continued to produce. In an off year for Travis Kelce, even in an off year for Mahomes, him and Isaiah Pacheco were really what was keeping that offense afloat in my eyes. Um, and even if they do draft a guy um, that would take that wide receiver one role, Rasheed Rice as a wide receiver two is really kind of scary to think about. Think about guys like Chris Godwin. Think about guys like T. Higgins. Like that's what kind of receiver Rasheed Rice would be um, as a wide receiver two in the Chiefs offense, maybe even above those guys. He'd probably be the cream of the crop when it comes to wide receiver twos. So Rasheed Rice, just a fantastic rookie season all around. A big surprise for me. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does next season.
Where do you have Rasheed Rice going around next year?
Let me look. I'm sorry. I didn't have it prepared.
That's okay.
Uh
I'm just curious. And by the way, when we say a guy is going, we predict a guy to go in that round, it could completely change after the draft, after free agency. There's going to be a lot of changes that we said, but just prepare for these lists to alter a lot after some changes. But this is where we currently have them.
Rasheed Rice, I have in the sixth round right now.
That's a little late.
Yeah.
That's a little
It's
late.
because yeah, but I know I don't know if you remember this, but I did I put some people on some other teams.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
put some free agent so um this probably isn't happening now, but when I did this way too early draft board, I had Mike Evans going to the Chiefs. So that's why Rasheed Rice is that low.
Yeah.
Realistically, he's probably like a fourth, fifth round guy,
Yeah.
like Luke
Definitely.
said.
Now touching on a guy that is beloved to you, Jaden Reed. I want to hear your opinion on Jaden Reed because obviously you know way more about him than I do.
Jaden Reed in a lot of ways reminds me of Adebo Samuel. Um, we saw a Packers rookie wide receiver score a lot of touchdowns last year, and then he kind of fell off this year due to a lot of injuries. I'm talking about Christian Watson. But I don't think that's the case with Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed is is the definition of versatile. If you watch Packers football, he gets end arounds all the times. All the time. He gets jet sweeps, and then he's very good receiver too. He has a lot of concentration drop kind of issues. He bobbles the ball a lot, and that's a little concerning as a Packers fan if he's going to be our wide receiver one moving forward. But Romeo Dobbs is kind of like our more of a security blanket, like more of like our Adam Thielen kind of guy, and he's still very young. And then Jaden Reed is really our big play guy, our guy that can do the things that a lot of other players in the league can't do. So I'm really excited to see what Jaden Reed can do moving forward and just how dynamic he is in our offense, how important he is to our offense. Makes me really excited for him fantasy wise.
Yeah. From what I've seen from Jaden Reed, he's a very gadget guy. Some would say. But he did seem a little touchdown dependent this year, which is obviously it's not a concern. But if touchdowns do dip, Jaden Reed won't be as ranked as high as some other guys that we have here. I have Jaden Reed right now going in the sixth or seventh round. That could change. I think seventh round is more realistic for Jaden Reed just because there's so many weapons on that team, like
Mhm.
Dontavion Wicks, Christian Watson. I don't know what the hell's gonna happen with Christian Watson, but Romeo Dobbs as well. But I think Jaden Reed seventh round is a fair evaluation. I like the comparison to Deebo Samuel. The Packers offense is going to be very exciting next year. I think if he was more prominent in what he did, he'd probably go earlier. But just because there's so many guys there, a lot of mouths to feed, I think a seventh round evaluation is fair for him.
Yeah, a lot of mouths to feed is pretty much exactly right. Those are the exact words I was about to use. Um, in my eyes, Romeo Dobbs is probably the most reliable, like I said, the most reliable receiver in that offense. He'll probably be the guy that Jordan Love trusts the most in dire situations. But when they get near that red zone, when Jordan Love is looking to score six, he's looking at Jaden Reed almost all the time, and that's a really exciting prospect. And we know how scary it is to draft players based on touchdown dependency, but there's some guys that just have a nose for the end zone, and you can almost count on it. Like you look at a guy like Mike Evans. You look at a guy. I mean, I know this is a running back, but you look at like Derrick Henry. There are guys that just have noses for the end zone. You know they're going to score points, and I see Jaden Reed becoming one of those guys.
Yeah, I don't mind that at all. Jaden Reed, very promising player. Next guy we're going to talk about, Jordan Addison. We briefly touched on him earlier. Jordan Addison had a great rookie year, very touchdown dependent as well. He didn't scratch 1,000 yards, but I loved what I saw of Jordan Addison, especially in that Cincinnati game. And who was the other great game he had against? I forgot.
Wasn't it against Philly?
Yeah, yeah, that was it.
Mhm.
But yeah, he was very reliable when Justin Jefferson was out. No one really expected him to take that turn up, but he played very well considering all the mess ups with the Vikings this year with so many quarterback changes and such. Jordan Addison, as I said, might be a little touchdown dependent, and Justin Jefferson being there might deter his value a bit. I have him going in that same range a little earlier than Jaden Reed because Minnesota's well known for their offensive schemes. Kirk Cousins is great for the wide receivers in terms of fantasy. I have him going in the later rounds or the later bit of the sixth round. In that kind of a guy we're going to mention soon, but Zay Flowers range, I think those guys are neck and neck in terms of where they're going to be drafted next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that there were four receivers drafted in a row in the NFL draft last year. One of those guys underperformed, Quentin Johnston. I mean, we still have faith, a little bit of faith for him, but it was a rough rookie year to say the least. But the other three guys all went in a row: Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who we'll get to, and Jordan Addison. Uh, they all look pretty similar when it comes to fantasy projections for next year. But Jordan Addison, what makes him so interesting is I know you said he was touchdown dependent, but I don't really see that, even though he did score a lot of touchdowns this year.
He had 10
I
touchdowns
think,
this year.
yes, he had 10 touchdowns this year, but I don't, but he's more like his games this year were really boom or bust. Like
Yeah.
you'd have games where he'd have one catch for 2 yards. And then you'd have games where he had like 8 catches for 200 yards and three touchdowns. It's things like that with Jordan Addison where you know that he's capable of having those big games, and he had a few of them this year. He had a few really big games this year, and that's what really boosted his numbers were those big games because there were a lot of pedestrian performances as well, but there were also those massive games when they needed him most. So as a wide receiver too, presuming Justin Jefferson is a Viking next year, um, Jordan Addison has the big play potential. He has the big game potential. I view them as like an AJ Brown and Devontae Smith duo, but like really kind of I mean, Justin Jefferson is a step up from AJ Brown. Jordan Addison's a step down from Devontae Smith, to say the least. He's like two
Yeah.
steps down from Devontae Smith. But but it's that kind of duo that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm looking at his stats. He did play well against Philly, but he really played well against San Fran. He had a great game against San Fran. I think that was a Monday night game. But I think what Jordan asked, we have to remember that Kirk Cousins was out for the majority of the year. The QB was up in the air. Jaron Hall, Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins. There's probably another guy in there too, but
That's it. That was the group.
okay, I got it. But yeah, Jordan Addison, I don't think we can really knock on being inconsistent. He is probably inconsistent, but in terms of like there was a lot of bad situations, and I think a fully healthy Vikings offense, he's going to become much more reliable. But he's definitely more of a big game type of player. Like he'll definitely have his down weeks, but he'll definitely have his up weeks as well. I like the point you made there. Moving on to the next guy, a guy that we kind of wish we saw more out of this year, but he did show very good signs. That's Jackson Smith and Jigba. Um, it's tough because he when he first was drafted to Seattle, everyone was kind of hyped up, but there's two guys ahead of him technically in the depth chart. It's Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and it's hard as a wide receiver three to get more of those targets in both those guys because those guys are very, solid wide receivers in this league. But Jackson Smith and Jigba showed signs, especially that Dallas game. He made a great catch. I think it was ruled out, but he definitely shows good signs of route running. Definitely the player we saw at Ohio State, just not in terms of like production that we really got to see out of him, which is a shame.
Yeah. When it comes to Jackson Smith and Jigba, uh, if you were watching Seahawks football this year, then you saw a lot of flashes with him. It's kind of what you expect. You saw ridiculous production when he was at Ohio State. You saw some really great things. His bowl game, his the year before he was drafted, he had like 300 receiving yards. It was ridiculous. And we just didn't really get to see that this year because of how many mouths there were to feed in that Seahawks offense. They had Kenny Walker, who started off the year really hot. They had Zach Charbonnet, who they were trying to incorporate in the offense, and then they had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who weren't necessarily getting as much work as they really wanted. So getting Jackson Smith and Jigba the ball was kind of they wanted to see him ramp up production in the offense, but it was hard to do that with so many mouths to feed. Still, he managed to bring in over 50 receptions on the year, which is pretty impressive. And he really overtook that wide receiver two role later on in the season. Tyler Lockett usually is a boomer bust guy. I had him on my fantasy team this year. Uh, Tyler Lockett in past years has had those games where he has 6 points, and then he has 33, and then he has 8, 12, then like a 40 piece. And that wasn't the case this year. We had like 2 20-point games, 2 or 3 20-point games from Tyler Lockett, and then the rest were pretty average to mediocre. And that was because Jackson Smith and Jigba was getting himself more involved in the offense.
Yeah, definitely. So I have Jackson Smith and Jigba in the early eighth round. Higher than last year, of course, but I think he will overtake Tyler Lockett, as you said, in this offense. Tyler Lockett's getting old now. Maybe be on a different team. We don't really know, but I like the value of eighth round. A lot of upside there, but he is also drafted in the eighth round, so he could really bust.
Yeah, I mean Jackson Smith and Jigba. I like that you brought up the Tyler Lockett point where he might not be on the same team next year. He kind of strikes me as a guy that would be like a Seahawk for life, Tyler
Yeah.
Lockett. But at the same time, he's still a good player that is kind of on the way out in Seattle. I could very easily see him being like a Chief next year or even a Panther. Uh, like he's really someone that could bring talent to any team. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, it's his time to shine in Seattle.
Yeah, I like that take a lot. And a guy we briefly mentioned as well, Zay Flowers, sort of in the range of a Jordan Addison. Zay Flowers is really the wide receiver one this team. He really impressed me when he like got a lot of work this year, especially in week one. I think he had like 8 or 9 receptions or something like that. And then in the playoffs, he played very I thought he played well against the Texans, but obviously that was kind of a blowout. Um, Zay Flowers is interesting because he's such a fast, shifty player, a yak guy, some would say. But I don't know with Zay Flowers because it's strange because the Ravens are never really known for like a prominent wide receiver. It's hard to call because Lamar has never really been like he has never really had that receiver where he's just relied on. It's more just working on his running game or the Ravens running game, and Mark Andrews got a lot of work. But Zay Flowers fits his Ravens offense like a glove. I love the role he has. I have him the same range as Jordan Addison in terms of that late sixth round. I have him a little lower than Addison just because I don't the Ravens don't rely on wide receivers as much as the Vikings, but I love the upside for Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I'm really on the same boat as you when it comes to Zay Flowers. There are obvious concerns when it comes to fantasy. Zay Flowers is a great player. He fits perfectly into the Ravens offense. And the thing about the Ravens offense is this is like the best receivers that Lamar's had his whole career. This core of Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham Jr., and then Rashad Bateman. And then you have tight ends like Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. The running game, even though Dobbins got hurt real early on in the season, uh, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, they all stepped up. Now Dalvin Cook in the playoffs, he had a pretty solid run. Um, this is just an offense that runs through Lamar Jackson and and Jim Harbaugh, or not Jim Harbaugh, sorry, his brother John Harbaugh, um, is a great coach that plays within his scheme, does what he thinks is best to do, and that isn't necessarily force feeding Zay Flowers the ball because he can afford to do other things and it still works really well. So the Ravens don't rely too heavily on a wide receiver one. And as talented as Zay Flowers is, I'm not sure I can put him in that same range like Rashee Rice or Jackson Smith and Jigba for that matter. Zay Flowers is a great player, but on the Ravens, I don't know if he'll necessarily see the volume.
Yeah. Yeah, volume was the word I was looking for. But the final player we want to talk about is Tank Dell. When Tank Dell played, that stretch he had of CJ Stroud was one of the most fun things to watch ever. I mean, the catches he was making, he's such a small guy, but the way he like goes up for the ball, he's very physical. Surprisingly, Tank Dell was very surprising when he played. Obviously, the way he went out, I don't know why he was lined up on a goal line rush. That was weird, but whatever. I have Tank Dell as a fifth, middle of the pack in the fifth round. The Texans have a lot. They're gonna have a lot of like hype next year in terms of fantasy. CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Those are three great pieces to build around this Texans offense. And Tank Dell, I mean, what a player! I'm very impressed with Tank Dell. I love if you can get Tank Dell as your third wide receiver, that's like unreal.
Tank Dell is so interesting to me because when he was playing this year, I feel like he was the wide receiver one on the team. But once he got hurt, you really saw the emergence of Nico Collins, even more so than earlier in the season. Nico Collins started off the year well, don't get me wrong, but Tank Dell was kind of like he was really exciting and new and shiny, and everyone's really excited about this rookie wide receiver. But Tank Dell really seemed like the wide receiver one on the team before Nico Collins emerged. And it's just going to be it's going to be one of the two that shows up as the guy next year. And it's really going to be exciting to see. It's kind of hard to predict. So I kind of wanted to get your take on that. Who do you
uh,
think is the better option?
I prefer Nico Collins, but obviously both are great options. I just think Nico Collins, he showed he's a bit more. I want to say consistent, but obviously it's tough to say because Tank Dell, we only saw a sample of Tank Dell. But when Nico
Mhm.
Collins, we saw in the Colts game how much CJ Stroud relied on Nico Collins. I mean, he was making catches. I mean, just to talk about Nico Collins, what great progression we saw from him. I mean, I never thought that we'd see like the heights he's reached this season. I'm very impressed with
Oh,
Nico
yeah.
Collins. I have him in like the end of the third round, I think, or start of the fourth. It can vary, but I like Nico Collins slightly more than Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell maybe have a higher ceiling, but I think Nico Collins definitely has a safer floor.
That was perfectly said. Nico Collins, I believe, does have the safer floor. Uh, Coming out of Michigan, I remember him a few years ago being in the draft, and I liked him. I never thought that he would be a wide receiver one on a team. I thought that he had potential, but not that kind of potential. But he's shown that he's serious. He's the real deal. Um, but Tank Dell seems like more of the short gain, electrifying playmaker, and then Nico Collins is more of the big play guy. Again, I know I make this comparison a lot. Think Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Nico Collins is Mike Evans. Tank Dell's Chris Godwin.
It's interesting. I don't know if I agree with that as much, just because I feel like Godwin just like racks up receptions like it's crazy. I don't know if I see Tank Dell doing that, but I don't hate the comparison of just guys, at least in terms of working off each other in a well flowing offense. But that actually wraps it up for today. T- Talked on a lot of points. Thought we made some good arguments. Awards are going to be interesting to see when they get announced. But ain't anything to say.
Um, let's see. Do I have anything to say? Go Ravens.
Ravens. All right. Thank you guys for listening to another episode. We'll be back next week, I'm presuming, with another episode. I appreciate all the support that we've gotten. Not as much maybe as we hope, but we want to keep going. We want to keep grinding. We really enjoy this, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you.